Everyone, welcome to this, the 12th online virtual Zoom Left Bank Village discussion evening. Great that we can continue our discussion evenings in such a way. A good opportunity for some of us to come together in shared companionship, to reflect, share our ideas and listen to others on issues of interest and value to consider. A quick show of hands please. Is this the first time you've joined us on Zoom? Quite a few of you. Thank you. Welcome everyone. Welcome. We've covered an eclectic range of subjects over these weeks, and tonight is no exception. Our guest speaker, Nick Howells, will be giving us a slide presentation about the two-year ongoing Yazor Widemarsh and Eign Brooks project. These are successive sections of the Wye's largest tributary through Hereford City. It clearly has much potential as a wildlife refuge and corridor and local amenity for all to enjoy. Afterwards, when you've had time to reflect, we would much appreciate your feedback about this evening and ideas for future sessions. What aspects would you like to explore and discuss further? This evening has been carefully planned, but please be patient if we run into technical or timing difficulties. All's well so far. Thank you so much for joining us. So, tonight's discussion evening. In a moment, I shall hand over to Jeremy Milne, our councillor for Central Ward, who will introduce Nick on behalf of the Hereford Civic Society. Nick will then give his presentation of about 25 slides during the first session. We invite you, please, to add your questions and points in chat for us to refer to and respond to throughout the evening, as well as verbal input when Nick has finished. 8:10 to 8:20, we shall have an optional break, discussion continuing informally. Please do not log off. This Zoom meeting will continue, but without time limit. 8:55, time for a summary, followed by a closing address from myself, leading up to a formal ending at about 9 o'clock. The meeting can then continue informally until around 9:15. Thank you. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you, Alan. Who has ever looked at an old map of Hereford and wondered at the braided and bifurcated Yazor, the Eign, the Widemarsh, the Small Porse and Eign Brooks system that run round to the north and sides of the city, and which once watered its moat and its mills? And who has thought what a shame it is we make so little of the watercourses today, shut out, culverted and overgrown as many of them are? And who has thought we could do better for their history and ecology? Well, this evening, I have the pleasure of introducing Nick Howells to tell us about the Wildlife Trust's Brooks project, its aims and its achievements. Hopefully many of you will have watched the virtual tour Nick posted online recently. Nick would have given this as part of the Civic Society's events programme this spring had the pandemic not intervened. So we are really pleased the Left Bank is able to host it tonight. Nick, a very warm welcome. Over to you.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks everybody else. There's also online a sort of a map-based history of the Brooks, which I will assume some people have had a look at, and if you haven't, it's well worth doing that to sort of contextualise some of what I'm going to say. And of course, as Jeremy said, there's also the virtual journey, very much an amateur movie, 27 minutes travelling down the brook. But we'll start the presentation, all being well. See what we get to. There we go. We'll go. Start. There we are. Hopefully everybody can see that. The first slide of the presentation. It's just setting out how this project came to be. January 2017, I think it was. Not quite sure exactly who was there. I know John Clark and Stas Calder were there from the Wildlife Trust. And I think it was Mo Burns and me. Not sure about anybody else. It was in the volunteer. in the back room at the Volunteer, and we discussed setting up a city branch of the Trust. Various other parts of the county have their own branch, and it was felt that it was an opportune moment to set up a city branch. And we also wanted to make it one that had a very much a practical project basis in mind. And one of the activities that seemed to be really pressing, along the lines that Jeremy said just now, was the Yazor, Widemarsh and Eign Brooks, which joined together to form a continuous watercourse from the north of the city down to the tributaries junction down near Outfall Road. We were seeing this as a blue-green corridor, is what we called it. And it's very good for people and for wildlife. And it's been an extremely enjoyable project over the 2+ years that it's been running. Got here on the right is the flyer we produced for the very first event, which was a guided walk along just one part of the brook from Widemarsh Common here, I think we started, down to the confluence. Here's a map of the catchment, shaded in that kind of purpley colour there. It does go right the way from right out here, which is sort of the Foxley Estate, in the headwaters of the brook up here. Hopefully people can see the cursor moving up there, and then flows down across the Roman Road. And it's that point that my video, my amateur movie, begins. And from then on, it flows through the city of Hereford down to the confluence, which is a little bit obscured by the word Hereford, just down here. That's the point at which it enters the River Wye. But it's a significant tributary of the Wye, and it's particularly significant to the city of Hereford. If we have a look at the next one, that description I briefly gave there, we've got, here is the new Whitecross School. I have to say this is quite old imagery. Google Maps imagery of Hereford is mostly very out of date. Some bits of the county are very up to date, including evidence of the floods that took place this year, but the city itself not so good. But here we are, the brook is coming in along this line of trees underneath Three Elms Road, past the gauging station, which is mentioned on the home movie, then along here through this open ground, bearing in mind that was Three Elms Road and the site of the old Mother's Pride Bakery here. The range is this big roof here. Along through these open areas, a very attractive section of the brook here, until we get down here to Yazor Road, go across Yazor Road, and then the brook continues through more fields. And round about here, you can see this sharp angle, which is a very distinctive thing on air photographs and on maps. Just here, where I've got the cursor, is this critical point called the Splitter Weir, which is where the leat that used to feed the city ditch runs off where I'm moving the cursor, past the site of the old Whitecross School, which is still shown on this map, but is now Redrow Homes Development, and along past the site of allotments, past the back of a trading estate down towards Plough Lane. Most of the time that bit of the brook is dry because the Splitter Weir will not allow water to go down it. Most of the flow continues round this dogleg here and then carries on along here, wiggling round through fields, and then it passes through the gap between Avara Foods up here and Heineken, carries on along by the Sixth Form College Westfields playing fields on a thing called Widemarsh Way along this line of trees here, and then it does a sharp right and goes along Millbrook Street and behind Prior Street to go beneath the A49, which is running here. Then it goes through the Merton Meadow car park, and round about here is a concrete bridge which is currently sadly, the entry to the COVID-19 testing centre, which is located on this part of Merton Meadow car park. The brook then goes round the back of what used to be the Entertainer, now Signature Interiors, underneath Widemarsh Street, and then it goes in a man-made channel, and we enter an area that's seen a lot of change. It used to do this dogleg. It now does a little sort of snick underneath the City Link Road, which has been built across this diagonal here, and runs alongside the City Link Road to rejoin its old course here, which is one side of Jewson's yard. Sharp curve round the back of the Jewson's buildings, and just here by the front entrance to Jewson's, it goes into a culvert, which has been improved recently. All of this is mentioned on the virtual journey, by the way. Underneath Morrison's, very few people have ever explored that. And then it pops out the other side here by KFC and becomes the Eign Brook. I should have mentioned that back here, it switches from the Yazor to the Widemarsh name. And then here, as it comes out from underneath the bottom of Aylstone Hill, it switches from the Widemarsh name to the Eign name, runs right next to the railway line, ducks underneath it through a Victorian archway along the side of Rockfield allotments over here, and then disappears underneath Ledbury Road and makes its way down alongside Sedgefield Road, which has still got a field which could be described as a sedge field, and enters the Wye just there. So that's viewing it on the satellite map. Just explaining the really early origins of the project. There is a pre-existing project. This is one of the interpretation boards for it. It's the Yazor, Widemarsh and Eign Brook Restoration Project, which was set up by Richard Fishbourne of Bugs and Beasties. They've got their logo down here. And in the early months of setting up the Yazor Brook project, we came up with a system that Richard would be taken on as the project manager for the trust in this project, which is listed on their website as one of the trust's projects. And Andrew Nixon, who I think is here tonight, is overseeing as the trust's senior conservation manager. As I say, this is one of the 2 interpretation boards that Richard had already put out alongside the brook before HYBRP, Hereford Yazor Brooks Restoration Project, was formally created. Very early on, there was a successful bid for £50,000 worth of community scale funding from the Environment Agency, specifically for natural flood management. This, of course, was early 2017. We'd just seen a lot of serious flooding across the UK, and that has continued. And so this money was available particularly for natural flood management. In other words, the kind of other side of the hard engineering of concrete and culverts, and much more working with nature to absorb and alleviate flooding. The catchment was divided into 2. The upper part, basically north-west of Roman Road, is managed by Lucinda Lewis, working for the Wye and Usk Foundation, and working very closely with local landowners and their management of the land to try and reduce flooding with natural control measures. And then the lower section, the urban section, managed by HYBRP and a whole load of partners working with us. We go into the high flows and flooding. This is all too familiar after the floods that we've had in October 2018, October 2019 and February 2020. I have got some photographs that might come up later on if anyone asks about them, but we've definitely got evidence that when the lower part of the Wye floods, sorry, the lower part of the Eign Brook floods, it's mainly the Wye backing up. The Wye backs up along the course of the Eign Brook a very long way. I think in this 2020, the February 2020 flood, it would have reached as far as that Victorian railway bridge on the far end of Rockfield Allotments, all the way back up there. The gradient of the brook is incredibly low, very, very gentle gradient, and that's to do with the glacial origins of the site of Hereford. Along the brook, there are these very significant low points, which we could call sumps. Widemarsh Brook, Widemarsh Way in particular, Merton Meadow and Essex Arms Sports Ground, all of which I'm going to identify very shortly. They were all underwater. We also had floods alongside the Yazor Brook at Huntington. And we've just been receiving reports of some homes flooded as far up as Kenchester in February 2020. These are the sumps. This is the Widemarsh Way sump, particularly the lower end of the playing fields, which you can see are flooded here. This is the culvert that takes the water of the brook underneath the bottom of Penhaligon Way and takes it across towards the next sump, which is Merton Meadow Car Park. Cars park there, but a large part of the car park, including the current COVID-19 testing station, really seriously flooded. This is the brook here with this double line of willows either side of it, just cutting through the central part there. And then this vast lake is the Essex Arms Sports Ground. Essex Arms is a pub that was on Widemarsh Street and was moved up to Queenswood and now overlooks the car park. But it's probably the biggest, deepest sump, and various people have different plans for it. Once again, mentioned on the amateur video, and also it'll come up again tonight, I'm sure. A very interesting possibility there, with a tremendous history. And there they are on wonderful LiDAR imagery extracted by David Lovelace. This has got an incredibly small contour interval here. You know, we're used to 5 metre contour interval on an Ordnance Survey 25,000 map. This is a 25 centimetre contour interval, I think. So it's very, very sensitive at picking up small differences in height. And we can see the Widemarsh Way Basin and the Merton Meadow Car Park Basin, and this bigger one here, which is the Essex Arms Sports Ground, superimposed on Ordnance Survey 1 to 25,000 map there. What David then did was he took the photograph, which is actually courtesy of Derek Foxton. It was an oblique photograph, but he geo-referenced it and stretched it so that we've got the 1, 2, 3 sumps, lakes, superimposed on the 1 to 25,000 map. Should say that photograph, you may have noticed on the caption, is March 2008, which is long, long before the floods we've seen recently, and also before the Yazor Brook flood alleviation scheme was built. I was showing this to some of the supervisors earlier today. Really nice LiDAR image here. This is actually extracted by Nikki Geeson. And it really does show clearly the way in which the low-lying ground alongside the Yazor runs right the way through the heart of the city. These are the 3 sumps again. This is Widemarsh Common, this is Merton Meadow Car Park, this is the Essex Arms site here. And we can see that water has the potential to back right the way up. This is not a flood risk map, it's a map showing the height of the land. So we've got various features here on this LiDAR. This is the embankment towards Hunderton Bridge, the railway embankment. And we've got another railway embankment here across Ledbury Road. And those of us who live in this part of the city were familiar with the flooding that took place underneath the railway bridge on Ledbury Road in February of this year. The problems continue despite the construction of the Yazor Brook flood alleviation scheme. Probably a good point to mention at this stage that responsibility for flooding on smaller rivers doesn't lie with the Environment Agency. It lies with the local authority and their agents, Balfour Beatty, in the case of Herefordshire. The big rivers, the Wye, that is an environment agency responsibility, but the smaller ones are kind of handed out to local authorities and their contractors. The aim of the flood alleviation scheme is to siphon water out of the Yazor at this point. Now I'm going to be adventurous here and try and take us back to that slide there, and then play from current slide. We're talking about an underground channel from just here, which is Credden Hill Sports and Social Club, just there. I don't know if you can see where I'm moving the cursor. The water goes through underground pipelines to emerge just here at Swains Hill. It's about the shortest section possible between the Yazor and the Wye. And the idea was, because there's quite a steep gradient, you can see there's a contour line running through there, or maybe you can. This is quite a steep gradient, therefore water is effectively siphoned out of the flooded Yazor and down into the Wye, thereby avoiding a wash of water through the city. That is the theory, as I understand it. However, the theory doesn't always work out in practice. And here we go, back from current slide. The Environment Agency office in Tewkesbury asked me to mention that there is another flood alleviation scheme that is part of this concrete weir that is much older than the Yazor Brook one. That opened in 2012. This one is the splitter weir again, and the idea is that if the water gets too high in the Yazor, it doesn't all go down the Widemarsh. Some of it is diverted to go along that dried up leat and enters the river near the Navy Cadets training ground. That's just an extra little feature there of flood control measures in Hereford. But the flood alleviation scheme, Yazor Brook, was meant to relieve flooding within the city. But in September 2012, not long after the scheme had been opened, Merton Meadow car park flooded again. This is the second of the sumps, but photographed from ground level so you can see it really clearly. Quite a lot of correspondence in the Hereford Times at the time, a leader comment that was fairly critical. The general opinion was that it was weed in the river channel, which had slowed the water flow down and led to this backing up. That may be just one of quite a few possible causes of that flooding. It was September, which should be the sort of dry point of the hydrological year. So it was a very unusual time for it to flood. The HYBER project is supporting natural flood management strategies, which I've not got time here to go through in detail, but just quickly, trying to encourage all developers to use sustainable urban drainage systems. Rather than letting the water flood off the concrete standings into the brooks, the idea is that you include lots of impermeable surfaces, including car parking, that the water can soak into the underlying gravels and recharge the water table rather than going straight into the watercourses. Wildflower meadows and woodland are good at intercepting and slowly absorbing rainwater and thereby flattening the flood peak, making it less likely to spill out into people's homes and businesses. Leaky dams were a suggestion. You may have watched Spring Watch and seen the beavers in action in Cornwall. We have a similar scheme in Lidbrook in Gloucestershire, which is a tributary of the River Wye. And the aim there is that the beavers construct dams which pull up water and release it slowly into the river, thereby flattening the peak. Debris removal, that's an ongoing task, always on the Yazor. The litter picking teams, community litter picking teams do a great job on that, and some of the work we've been doing alongside the brook has helped. There are very few of these self-clearing grills along the Yazor Brook, and I can say more about them if anyone's particularly interested or respond to a query with an email if anyone wants to know about them. But they don't depend on workers going in and repeatedly clearing them. They allow a natural process to clear the debris and not block the grill. And then the riverbank coppicing is much of what we've done alongside Widemarsh Way. See some photographs of that in a minute. 200 trees were planted near to Yazor Road, downstream of Yazor Road, and that attracted, obviously, a very obvious activity of Highburp, and it attracted a lot of positive comment from residents and passers-by. We've also done some riverbank coppicing on Rockfield allotments, largely down to David, the site rep down there. He did a lot of work on his own, clearing those. Low flow is a very interesting spin-off of Highburp, and it was one of our first actions. We found out the Environment Agency already had a low flow project. And that's why they installed that monitoring station on Ledbury Road, just by this bridge here, which is in the photograph, next to Texaco Garage. There's also a permanent monitoring station measuring the flow of the river at Three Elms. That's filmed on my amateur video. But in October 2017, a few months after Highburp started, the brook dried up for a prolonged period of time. And I'd done some work with Bob Hocknell, BBC Midlands Today reporter. And so I contacted him, and he came down with a cameraman, and he was filmed walking along the dried up bed of the brook like it was a footpath. And we, at the time, thought that it was the City Link Road that was responsible. We now suspect that may not have been the primary cause. But certainly there was a lot of concern when the brook dried up. The whole of the Eign Brook dried up, and there were a lot of fish deaths as a result. I think, sadly, that some of this little tiny bits of debris here, as well as willow leaves, they are dead fish. We found a lot of dead fish. We also did a fish rescue, took a big bucket down, tipped them in the Wye, where the pike probably ate them immediately. Environment Agency research suggests that it's groundwater that maintains the water in the brook, as well as flow from upstream. Groundwater is tremendously important, and because the gradient of the river is that the Eign Widemarsh Yazor is very, very gentle, it only takes tiny amounts of variations in the water level, possibly as little as 25-50 centimetres, could actually cause the brook to dry up. It's very, very sensitive to changes in ground level. And this is what the Tewkesbury office of the Environment Agency are looking into. The factors that control that. Some of them are physical, some of them are human. You know, obviously the physical ones include the rainfall, but the human factors, also industry and agriculture. Industry does abstract water. There are perfectly legitimate licenses granted to allow industries in Hereford to extract much more water than they're currently doing. That is a fact that we can't get away from. Then there was also £20,000 of WEEF funding, water and environment improvement, and there were two projects that we went for there. They're citizen science projects. One of them is the river fly monitoring, and we're always looking for volunteers to get involved in that. We think it's probably the most monitored small waterway in the whole of the riverfly network, which covers pretty much all of the country. Their head office is... Sorry? Their head office is in the Lake District, so it's a national campaign, but 15 sites along the brook is pretty intensive, and they're regularly monitored. So we're building up a really good database on the water quality by using the invertebrates that we find in the brook. There's also modular river survey known as MORPH, and that is a technique for very, very detailed mapping of the environment of the brooks, the actual shape of the banks and the bed and the material in which creatures like this mayfly are living. Other people within the project highlight David Lovelace and Andy Tatchell have done a lot of work on the history of the brooks. David has got a very extensive collection of photographs, a nice one here down from Ledbury Road. This is Tupsley Lodge opposite the Texaco Garage, which is this kind of area here. Downstream here, all of this land has been built on. This is Brookfield or Brookside Close, I think, along here. This, I think, is Litchfield Avenue, but nearly all of this has been built up. This is a 1946 air photograph. And for his part, Andy has done a lot of work on the history of the mills. And there are some possible extremely interesting talks there if you're looking for people to talk about specific aspects of this. We also have a movement camera, a trail camera. Periodically we put that out on the brook, and we've got some great footage, and that's been put up on a YouTube channel. We don't yet have any otter footage, but I do know that Helen, who I think is in the audience as well, did find otter spraint on a concrete culvert very close to Ledbury Road. So it's only a matter of time until we get some otter footage. But if you want to see that footage, go to the Trust website and the project page, and there's a direct link to the YouTube videos. The WEEF money was used to buy tools and training and also improve public engagement. So we've got a string here. I won't read through them all, but there are, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, including Richard's original 2. And then there's another one coming soon, we hope, at Plough Lane. So there'll be 9 altogether down the brook. The first one being just as you exit the footpath by the new White Cross School. And the last one is down just before the Eign enters the Y. Nearly up the last slide, here's some photographs of the very distinctive style. We kept Richard's original colour scheme, so they match the original 2. This is the High Burp store, which has a combination lock so that anyone with the combination can get into it and get tools for carrying out the coppicing work that we do. And also there are fish rescue kits in there, which include little battery operated oxygenators to keep the poor things alive. Here's Richard and Andrew Nixon working on the brook, doing some of the coppicing here. You can see the cut stumps of the trees, clearing debris from the brook. This is Bulmer's Heineken Works in the background there. Both winters, last 2 winters, we've been working there. This is the chipper we use to process the debris. Had to be very careful because on our left are the playing fields, and we try very hard not to disrupt those and upset the groundsmen, who've been very good in giving us access to this bank of the river to do the work. We've been joined by the litter picking teams, and we've worked alongside them very successfully. We've tried to take the cleared trees away, and some people have taken them off as firewood, particularly the hawthorn, which was very popular because it's excellent firewood. But we did that in order to stop them floating off downstream, having been chucked back in the brook by local ne'er-do-wells. And we've tried to make sure the work we're doing isn't actually making matters worse. Nicola Goodwin came and interviewed the litter pickers and the clearance team back in January 2020, and that appeared on Radio Hereford and Worcester's website and on the news reports. Lots of positive reports, and we've seen fish, ducks and kingfishers and woodpeckers and owls have been heard. The phosphate issue is one that many people will be aware of on waterways throughout the county, and the Yazor Brook is no exception. And then we've also got this ambitious proposal for an urban wetland park beside the Widemarsh on the Essex Arms Sports Ground. More of that later on. And then finally, this is just a list of all the different organisations that are involved. They do appear in the article that I've written for the Wildlife Trust magazine. And in fact, most of these slides are in that magazine. So there's one incentive to join the Wildlife Trust. There are many others, of course. including opportunities to get involved in this project. The best starting point would be to go to the project page. And we do have a blog on which we update volunteering opportunities. Now, I've run over a few minutes because we were a few minutes late starting, so I hope that's okay to stop there and enter the brief questions and discussions stage.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, so the way that we tend to do this is that if someone wants to raise a question, they can do one of two things. They can put it into the chat, which you can all open. If you're not used to Zoom, it's down the bottom. It says chat, and you just open that up and you can type into it. If you want to verbally ask a question, you're welcome to. The way we do it is you raise your hand. What Alan and I will try and do is monitor who's raising their hand and when, and do it in a sequential way. So you might not be asked to respond straight away, but we will get to you. If you don't have your video going, there are on the bottom, but you want to ask a question and you don't want to ask it on chat, you can, there's a reactions button on the bottom stream of the Zoom screen. If you're on a phone, it will look slightly differently, but you should still have it. And you can put your hand up or do a thumbs up. There's also one within, I think there's one in there. Where's it gone? It's not there. Somewhere you can actually put your hand up. I've forgotten where it is, to tell you the truth, because I'm going to use it. But feel free to use the thumbs up from the reactions button, and we will use that as an indicator that you want to ask a question for now. So, any questions for Nick? Or there was also someone else who was Helen, I think, had some input that could answer questions if anybody wants. So if you want to ask a question. Linda, so if you unmute, please. So it says Linda, but it wasn't Linda. It was Linda's man friend or husband. So please ask your question.
Very interesting, and it just made me think. At the back of our house is the Aylesbrook, which drains down into there somewhere, and Bloor Homes are just building 450 houses behind us, but directly behind us is what's called a green corridor, which will allow people to walk along the side of the Aylesbrook to get from the Roman Road up towards the A30, A49. And I'm just wondering if you've got an interest in looking at the Aylesbrook as well. Because at the moment it's badly neglected.
Yes, it does feature on. Have you seen the maps analysis?
No, I haven't. I'm afraid.
It's worth having a look at that.
I'm interested in it. Yes.
Because the Aylesbrook is mentioned on that. It spends quite a lot of its time very obscure. It's actually quite difficult to put it on the ground. But as you say, it does run in that direction. We've not done a lot of investigative work on it yet. As I say, I'm still to find a really accurate map of its course. The Ordnance Survey don't mark all of it, I think because quite a lot of it is culverted. I know the bottom end of it appears to go round the side of the Curry's retail park, and the bed of it has been allocated to the Canal Trust as a possible route for the canal if they ever reinstate it that far. But I know that that is the lower end of the Aylesbrook just before it goes into the Widemarsh, which is somewhere in the vicinity of that entertainer on Newtown Road. So that end of it I do know a bit about, but further up remains to be investigated. But that would be part of the project because the Ale is a tributary of the Yazor and therefore part of the catchment. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just so you know, I have put in links in chat to both the video that Nick has done and also the history of maps. So you could get to those, both the video and the history of maps. They're in chat. If you can't see it, let me know and I'll put it in there again, because if you came in too late, later on, I should say, you won't see them.
Did you write his name down?
Who else would like to ask?
William had his hand up.
Oh, what have you done?
William, if you would like to come off mute.
Is that better?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
We
good.
can
Good. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nick. Yes, very interesting. I was peripherally involved in the Yazor Brook flood alleviation scheme. It's not strictly a siphon, it's just an overflow, really, because as you said, there's a considerable difference in level between the brook and the river. It's got a crude throttle, I suppose, just downstream of the offtake. And I always wondered how appropriately that had been sized, really. And it sounds that if there's too much water passing it, then there's too much water reaching Hereford. Of course, it is relatively high in the catchment anyway. And it may be during certain flood events, there's just more water entering the catchment downstream of that point, the takeoff point, than that Hereford can handle. And that may be why it fails. But from a restoration point of view, I don't suppose you're too concerned about its effectiveness anyway.
No, or yeah, I mean, yes, we have had some contact from people who know that the scheme is operating and have expressed some concerns. This is the Kentister flooding that we've heard about, and whether or not that is linked to the throttle or the grill giving entry to it. There are many other factors, as you say, Will. It may well be that the catchment downstream of the flood alleviation scheme is still capable of generating a flood peak because so much of it is hard standings. I mean, there are some huge areas of hard standing for car parks. I mean, Merton Meadow itself, for a start, is going to shed a lot of water. Although I gather there is a kind of a catch tank there. A flood alleviation catch tank that's pumped out once it's full, or it used to be. But there are many other reasons. The clogging up with weed, there may be something in that. And that's a topical point because at the moment it is absolutely choked. You can hardly see any open water on any section of the city brooks at the moment. If you look at the bit where it goes underneath the A49, there's an awful lot of weed in there, because it just grows very quickly in the silt. Another thing that was done, I don't know if it's a project you were involved in, but the culvert under Morrison's was radically renewed. In 2008, when those floods occurred, and Derek Foxton's photos, that culvert was a very, very low old brick arch underneath the entrance to Jewson's. And if you go and look at it now, it's on the video that I made. It's a really smart concrete entrance, much bigger. And I gather a lot of work was done underground involving divers to improve flow through that culvert under Morrison's, which could have actually been forming a throttle. But
you talked about these self-cleaning screens. I've not heard of self-cleaning screens. How do they work?
Basically, the grill is on a slope. It's raked, so it's quite a gentle angle. So all the floating debris, the logs and what have you, will just ride up it. And some of them actually have like a catch at the top, so that if the logs rise right up, they just flip over onto a little table where they can be moved later on. But the main thing is that the debris floats up the grill rather than jamming against it. So that they're sloping like that, so the debris rolls up the slope. on top of the water. It's only
Yeah.
appropriate for floating debris.
Well, yeah, because great lumps of floating weed will still obstruct it to an extent, won't they?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask you something, Nick?
Yeah.
You haven't mentioned the fact that the Yazor Valley was the former route of the River Wye, and that the valley itself is eroded very deeply into bedrock, as shown in the geological memoir, and then infilled with gravels.
Yeah. Yeah. That comes up. If I just share screen again quickly, which I think I can do. Yep, here we go. If we come out of this slideshow, you are screen sharing. Need to come out of it. There we go. But that point is borne out very clearly by this slide, where we can see here, this is the former course of the Wye, and because it was blocked, correct me if I get this wrong, Moira, if it was blocked by a recessional, a terminal moraine somewhere off here to the west, then the Wye could no longer continue along its course on which it laid down its gravels, and in fact it had been pushed southwards to create what we call the Brainton Gorge, and it comes in much lower down here on its present course. It was pushed south by moraine debris, we think, but because it was originally flowing along here, there are a lot of gravels, and I think I found some of those alongside the Yazor Brook up at Huntington. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's very important because those provide the water.
It seemed to me that the flood alleviation scheme was just removing a little of the surface water from the brook, whereas most of the water was sinking down into the gravels and flowing past at greater depth, so that it would continue to flood because of that.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of free movement of water. This is what the Tewkesbury office are looking into in some detail, and they're still working on it. You know, that low flow was installed in 2013. No, not 2013. Yes, 2013. So it's 7 years they've been working on this. One of the problems is there's not that many boreholes. So it's actually quite difficult to monitor water levels, particularly downstream of this area, Widemarsh Common. There are very few, if any, boreholes down here. So it's quite difficult to monitor what the groundwater is doing.
What about at Credden Hill? Are there any boreholes up in that area?
Yes, I think there are, yeah.
Because that's where they're diverting the water.
Yeah, I think they're partly linked with monitoring the water table after they finished quarrying at Brockhall Quarry.
Thank you.
Nick, there's one question on the chat from Lynn asking, does Enmite or SAS or Balfour Beatty have the technology to trace the roots of brooks under buildings? No.
There's a strong possibility, Enmite in particular, given that there are quite a few links with, shall we say, surveillance and other such industries and expertises. I would think it might exist. I mean, Welsh Water have some very sophisticated cameras that go on little trolleys, and they can trace pollution sources, but there are limits caused by Victorian drains with uneven, broken surfaces where these little buggies struggle to get up. But yeah, there's some amazing devices out there, and between them, I think those organisations would be able to tackle quite a lot of those tasks down quite small courses. You know, you're dealing with domestic drains that are only a few inches, let alone big culverts underground. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think Alan had a question as well. Then I've got another one on the chat after Alan.
Over to me. Nick, thank you. Brilliant presentation. Loved it. Fascinating. I've seen different bits of the Brooks and never, I've always wondered where it came from and where the bits joined up, but never took it any further. I used to walk from PC World down Newton Road and then turning into Widemarsh Street by that tiny roundabout and looking over the wall where that signature furniture place is at the section of Brook there. I think that's the Widemarsh section there.
Yes, yeah.
And there's loads of iris and reeds and plants. And one time looking down and seeing quite a lot of fish there, which was lovely to see right in an urban environment. Another time I looked and it was completely dry, and you referred to that in your presentation. I just wondered, would there be any possibility of sections in every now and again of digging out a sump so that when the flow dries up, there are still bodies of water where the fish could go to and survive for a much longer period?
This is something that Richard, the project manager, has been working on for a long time. I think he's working with Balfour Beatty and the Environment Agency, because Merton Meadow would be the ideal place to do exactly that, which is just upstream of what you're talking about. But to create fish havens, if you like, because they will obviously retreat to deep water sections. So yes, that is very much part of the plan. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. There's a question. I'm being asked whether what we know about archaeobotanical potential of the waterlogged sediments of the sumps. And there's an assumption that they contain organic post-glacial fills of interest to the Ice Age Ponds project.
They do. Hang on. They are of interest very much. Here we go. Hang on. I've got a slide on that, provided by Nikki Geeston, who did a very good slideshow on the Essex Arms site. It's this slide here. Here we go. Oh, the technology is working. This is a document she found from English Heritage 2013. And look at that. Exceptional waterlogged heritage. What a great theme. And this is the inventory that we're building up. And number 36 in their inventory, Hereford urban wetlands. They mentioned 3 features. The Widemarsh floodplain has prehistoric peat and medieval tanning evidence under threat from a road scheme. Obviously, the City Link Road. That site has been, to me, pretty horrendously dug up. There's a vast polythene sheet buried in there. I mean, one of the things that was planned was some kind of development. At one stage, the Hereford Times had a 3D fly-through, which showed university student accommodation being built right on that bit next to Jewson's yard off the Link Road. As I understand it, partly through Nikki's presentation, which part of which we're looking at here, more people are now understanding this is an extremely valuable site for heritage, deep heritage, Ice Age heritage. Also, it's an incredibly expensive site on which to build because it just floods. And even a 1 in 20 year flood is likely to flood it. So any building would have to have like a sacrificial ground floor as a car park, a bit like the Greyfriars development. And therefore that adds to the expense of developing it. So whether any developer would ever be prepared to pay that much, especially in the situation that we're in now. So the idea is being taken very seriously of extending our enthusiasm into council policy to develop it as a wetland site.
Right. Thank you very much. I think we have a question from Andrew Nixon as well. So Andrew, if you'd like to come off mute, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, really excellent. Thank you, Nick. That was really very interesting. And yeah, just to reiterate just a couple of things from the project perspective, we are trying really hard to work with Herefordshire Council about the Essex Armsfield site, and I think we are hopefully getting a little bit of traction on that now and making some headway. So fingers crossed that we can achieve that going forward. And going back to the mention of the Ailes Brook earlier on, we are also working with Herefordshire Council, the Environment Agency, and the Wyant Usk Foundation to develop a continuation of the county's natural flood management project, which has been running for the last couple of years, alongside our Yazor Brook project. And within that county project, we are working really hard to make sure that the Yazor and a number of other city brooks are included in that bid, including the Ailes Brook. So hopefully we'll be able to do some more investigation if that is successful. So, and if it is successful, we're looking at perhaps another 6 years of funding for the project as well. So, we are trying, we are working hard to give continuation to the activities that we've been doing over the last couple of years. And there are other sort of funding streams coming online as well, which might be able to assist us with this project, such as the last, believe it or not, the final rounds of European funding, which we were able to access as well. So yeah, it's just to really give an update that we've had this funding for the last couple of years, but it's certainly by no means the end of the project, and we're working hard to continue into the future with this.
Thank you, Andrew. That was very helpful, very enlightening. Is there any more questions or clarifications that anybody wants to provide or ask? Jonathan, if you'd like to come off mute, thank you.
Yeah, you can hear me now.
Yes, I can.
Right. I live behind the Yazor Brook overflow, which is where the horse and groom car park is. And it's now dry. Even when there's a heavy downpour, I know that it's the water's diverted, as Nick has explained. But before they built the link road, there used to be water running along this overflow, Yazor Brook. And is there any way of, recently they have, we're next to supermarket Aldi, and about 3 months ago, Aldi got a mini digger in the Yazor Brook overflow, and scraped it out so that it was flowing underneath. There's a car park extension, but there's still no water. I mean, it's all clear. Where I am, there's no weeds. There are weeds behind steels, but there is a bat flying around, and we've got swifts. It'd be nice to see a bit of water. That's my question.
My understanding is that it's limited by that concrete lip. If that lip is overspilled, which it must have been, I would have thought, in February, then water should start going down past your section. I noticed that Balfour Beatty had done some work and had cut down a willow tree at the back of Aldi there. There's been quite a bit of clearance done. So they're obviously aware that it was getting very blocked up, and it is their responsibility. I've never actually managed to go out and connect the two critical points, which are the overflow weir and the exit point, which is by the gun, by the cadets, the Sea Cadets training hut. That is where that water, I think, exits into the River Wye. I've never managed to connect those 2 points and seen them flowing at the same time, but I think that is the connection. So that would be the thing to check if you're ever in a downpour and you want to see if the brook is flowing again, you can see it's flowing past your place.
Yeah.
Go and check whether it's going over the splitter weir, and also check whether it's coming out down at the other end. The only way to get flow permanently, I guess, would be to risk breaking down the splitter weir. I'm not suggesting this as a guerrilla action, by the way. Breaking down the splitter weir to allow water to flow down it, but that might do it might then soak into the gravel bed, and you'd get no water in either.
I don't want to be flooded.
No. I think the design is to alleviate flooding from people who live down the Yazor. I believe that little brook, we'll call it the city lead feeder. I believe that has flooded. I think it did within the last 10 years. I think it has flooded some of those industrial units that lie between the splitter weir and Plough Lane.
All right, thank you.
William had his hand up.
Yep. You'll need to come off mute, William.
That's it. No,
Now you've gone back on.
you're back on mute.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Oh, right, it says mute. Is this splitter weir then the one at the end of Plough Lane?
No, it's a bit further up. It's a bit further up on the way towards Yazor Road.
So you follow the brook up from the end of Plough Lane, you'll come upon it. But that's not the same splitter weir you were talking of earlier.
Yes, there is only the one splitter weir that marks the beginning of the Widemarsh Brook in modern naming. And on my bike tour, on my homemade video, the water is actually just below the lip. You can see it quite clearly.
Yes, I've seen that weir. I didn't think that was the one that fed this alternative channel that you're now talking about. I thought it was fed another channel that you described earlier.
Yeah, it does. It goes straight on past the old Whitecross School, past Red Road development. In fact, it goes under what was the back gate to Whitecross School and is now access for the residents of the Red Road development onto the cycle path. It goes right next to the cycle path, and then it disappears into a self-clearing grill under Plough Lane.
Yes, I picture that. Yes.
Then it pops out near the near the beer in hand. There's a little short open section there. Then it dives underneath, and then it's culverted for most of the way actually from there underneath, somewhere in the vicinity of Friar Street. And then there's a bit of new channel that takes it underneath the playing fields and brings it out by that gun by the cadets.
Right.
That's what Welsh Water told me.
Yes, yes, I will explore.
A lot of it is underground.
Yes.
But on the old maps, it fed the city ditch. And obviously there's no water in that and no culvert for that. So it's been rerouted.
I mean, whoever set up the splitter weir had their reasons at the time, but obviously it could be adjusted. Yeah.
The Environment Agency are fully aware of it and its purpose, and probably know the date and the original spec for it.
Right.
I would think.
I think Norman has a question.
It's a comment, really. Nick, absolutely terrific presentation. I'm afraid I was completely unaware of this whole project. I shall be looking at your video with interest and walking around Hereford, looking with completely renewed interest at these stretches of water. Absolutely fascinating, eye-opening. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Norman. That's great. It is a very interesting bit, and I still enjoy exploring them. It's good for lockdown walks, because you've got wide paths, plenty of social distancing. Highly recommended.
I shall probably leave it until the pubs open, so I could call in to some of the pubs as well. Thank you.
Beer in hand en route.
Good idea.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Or Helen, do you have anything you want to add?
Not really, other than to confirm that yes, I did find an otter's brain. I think I've still got a photograph of it actually, but so it's a bit sad we haven't seen any otters yet, but I'm sure they'll turn up eventually. But yes, thanks, Nick, for going through all that. It's really interesting. Glad to see that everybody else has found it interesting too. That's really good.
Right. Nick, Jeremy, or Alan, did you have something you wanted to say?
So, sorry, did you notice someone else? Other people always go first.
I can't see anybody else who was raising their hand.
No, right, yeah, me then. Nick, you mentioned earlier about looking into making fish havens. That answered my question there. Much of the evening has been about the course of the brooks, the history, geology, water flows, flood alleviation, and so on. Quite naturally, the first concern. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's been done, or I expect it's more a case of might be planned or hoped for in the next months or year, about developing things, planting things, creating wildlife havens to try and attract a greater range of plants and animals and things?
Well, partly that's the role of the coppicing and the clearance, because the ultimate source of this whole chain of wildlife is light. And so by letting more light in to that section of the Widemarsh Way, rather than sort of building an environment, you're just altering an environment to let more light in, which is the classic coppicing process. But we have noticed that it has been very successful, not only because people can clearly see the brook, but also it definitely is attracting more invertebrates, more fish, and then a whole range of things in the food chain up from there. So
yeah, it's all about food chains and webs, isn't it? Yeah,
and ducks moving in. I mean, I have got some lovely footage actually. I think it's on the YouTube channel of okay, there are only mallards, but I doubt whether they would have been there before or they would have just been passing through, but they're stopping and quite definitely feeding on the bed of the brook.
Good.
It's either weed or invertebrates that they're going for. On the last work party, which was a really pretty dismal day in the middle of winter, incredibly wet, but we did have at least 2 kingfishers flash past us on Widemarsh Way. There's a couple who live back onto Merton Meadow car park, and they've seen that they are certain that there are kingfishers nesting along that section in Merton Meadow. So dredging the bed there would serve the purpose not only of creating like a fish refuge, but also a better substrate for invertebrates. But fish, big fish, we've seen right up as far as, certainly as far as Widemarsh Way, making their way up through the culverts. They'd have to pass through several culverts to get up that high.
Yeah.
So, and there's also the planting that I mentioned. Richard has done that, but there are plans to plant more, and also grassland, and an area possibly of what might be called carr, like a sort of cross between a fen and a woodland. There's that area remember I said with the sharp, distinctive angle on it, just below the split area. There's an area there that is liable to flooding, but could be developed into something that was a better wildlife habitat than it is at the moment.
Any thoughts to plant a wider range of bog plants and water plants actually in the water?
That would definitely be an essential part of the Essex Arms development. That is a really big project, partly because of the mess that's been made of it during the, well, I have to say, rather half-hearted attempt to develop it, which don't seem to have really gone anywhere other than creating a horrendous weedy mess. But on other parts of the brook, yes. I mean, clearance is a lot of it, because you might be able to clear areas to create pools in which you might then plant. But nature's pretty effective at dispersing seed, especially in a brook that floods both upriver, with seeds and invertebrates being carried up in a Y flood, and also with stuff being washed down.
Right.
So there wouldn't be much need for us to intervene in terms of planting, apart from perhaps in the bigger areas. We might need to reprofile the banks and do some of the kind of work that's been done at Bodenham Lake.
Yeah, so give nature a chance, and it takes over and does its stuff. So you mentioned it, Essex Arms development. Of those 3 sumps, is the Essex Arms one the deepest sump?
Yeah, I think it's the deepest. Right. It's the 3rd one down, so it's the lowest downstream of the 3.
So greatest potential for wetland.
Yeah.
Wetland habitat. Yeah.
It might even be possible to dig out some scrapes that go below the permanent water table. So you could have permanent ponds, which local schools could use for pond tipping. I should also say that Nikki's plan does include, which has been presented to councillors and council officers, does include a walkway to link from the new medical centre through into the city. So it could mean a whole new approach for visitors entering Hereford, is that they walk through that wetland, which is basically in a dead straight line to the cathedral from the station. And also people who are going to the medical centre could actually have a pleasant area to look out onto from the medical centre, and even to go out and walk around before or after their appointment.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Nick, you mentioned you showed us sorry, was that Jonathan? Did you have your hand up?
Yeah.
Jonathan, over to you.
I just noticed that Andrew Nixon on the chat. Good to see that wild flower seed is going to be planted, wildflower meadows. And just going back to this Yazor Brook overflow, there's it's dry, it's being cleared by Balfour, as you've explained, and behind the Horse and Groom, which I overlook, it's totally barren, and unfortunately the owner of the car park, he put down, must have been lethal poison, because nothing's grown back since he put it down years ago, and that's why it's barren. As soon as you go behind Steele's, where the poison didn't, it's just natural, and very overgrown actually. If there's any way of, because you have a lot of shoppers who walk to Aldi across that new their Aldi supermarket car park extension. And they walk over and they look into this dry Yazor Brook overflow, and it might generate some interest. I've often thought about kind of contacting the owner. I mean, the owner of who did this poisoning, and but I don't want to upset my neighbour. It has to be done tactfully. Of course, speaking to these people. Just a thought.
Yes, I mean, I think probably the Balfour Beatty thing is because they're ultimately responsible for flood management, and that is part of an existing flood management scheme. I think that's what the Weir is about. However, I'm not sure how close the bed of that brook is, the one that goes past your house. I'm not sure how close it is to the water table. It might be that if the water table rises, the brook starts flowing again, even before it flows over the splitter weir. As I say, I've not explored this in any great detail. There are no monitoring stations, as far as I know, on that brook at all. I mean, it is quite a crude scheme. The water either spills over or it doesn't. But I can see what you mean. It would be nice to have it vegetated, because at the moment it's a really sort of pretty grim Los Angeles style.
Someone needs clearing the litter, which is someone needs making. I mean, it might even be Aldi. Maybe I don't know. So it's litter free.
Yeah, well, I think that'll be Balfour Beatty, and they should be held to that task, in my opinion, because it is their responsibility. It's flood control. It can't be allowed to fill with litter because it won't serve as a flood control scheme in any way if the splitter weir is overflowed. And I'm sure they are aware of that. I think that's probably why the work has been done recently. Getting vegetation onto the banks is going to be tricky.
Yes, yes. There's not much of a bank. The banks are pretty poor, aren't they? Yeah, I've really enjoyed this presentation as well. I just want to say, I'm going into my little patch here. It's very good of you to listen. Thanks.
There is a counsellor. There is a counsellor who might be your counsellor who works at the Beer in Hand.
Yeah, she's really, Councillor Polly Andrews.
Well, if she's the one that's emailed the trust, she has expressed interest in this because it does go right into the back of their premises. So, you know, you're not alone in being interested in this.
Yeah, she's very good at getting Balfour Beatty to do things like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Thanks.
Sorry, just unmuting myself, then I was tapping away with responding to someone. Just so everybody knows, if you look up through, you can take a copy of the chat if you want, just by going to the 3 dots at the bottom right of the chat screen. You click on that, and at the top it says Save Chat. It will save it to your computer, whether it be a laptop, or Mac, or whatever. You might have to go and find it. It will be in a Zoom folder. But it will give you a list of all the links and comments that people have put, some of which are very interesting. We're now 10 to 9. Does anybody else have any questions? Alan, you do.
Nick, one of your slides earlier, you showed slightly distressing one of the brook being dried up.
Yeah.
Not the general idea of how brooks should be or how we like them to be. You said that some of that debris might be dead fish, and that teams did go out doing fish rescue and putting them in the Y. Your rather cryptic comments, probably got eaten by the pike, but then that's food chains and webs again. You also showed a very, very neat piece of carpentry, a store cupboard, where fish rescuing gear could be. I was just wondering what sort of fish were rescued? What sort of fish?
Well, I'm not the fish expert. That's Richard. I don't think he's here in the audience. So Richard and Emil. Emil is also a very, very good fish person, keen fisherman. He's worked with me and Richard alongside the brook. They are forever identifying fish. I'm not that good at identifying them. The little ones, they're definitely sticklebacks. And
classic brook. Yeah.
Yeah, but there were some little silver ones. I mean, is there such a species as a minnow, or is that just a generic name for a small fish?
No, you get minnows. Yeah, they're brook fish. Yeah.
They were very silvery, and when the poor things were in the deoxygenated water, that's all you could see was just their sides as they flew. Yeah. It was a very distressing experience going down that October morning. I trespassed onto the Essex Arms site and checked out the artificial channel that's been laid alongside, and it was full of dead and dying fish, and there was nothing I could do about it. We did find a pool of them later in that drought period, and we did manage to rescue them in a bucket and put them in the river. Since then, we've acquired these fish rescue kits, which actually have, they're a very big bucket. Problem with that, of course, is it's extremely heavy to carry. And if you put it in a car, you've got the issue of it tipping over. So there are practical issues, but nevertheless, it's got a little oxygenator, which gives them more of a chance. So we keep a close eye on the brook. I mean, several of us have an allotment on Rockfield, and therefore, you know, if we're down there, we'll have a little look at the brook and see if it's still flowing. So hopefully we'd be alerted. I think the Tewkesbury office would alert us if their monitoring station down at Ledbury Road picked up that the flow had stopped, and they'd get onto us because we're a lot closer than they are. And so we might hopefully be able to get out and rescue more fish than we did before. But the idea of sumps is worth following up. But the species, I'm sure that Richard could tell you all the ones he's seen over the years in the brook. But there are quite a lot, and they go a long way up the brook. What's been amazing, by the way, is the fact the brook has remained with a good flow all the way through this drought. During the lockdown, it coincided with a drought that I think must have exceeded, with a few tiny dribbles of rain, for as much as 8 or 9 weeks. There has been a long dry period, but it hasn't done the brook in. The water table has kept up, probably because it came after that horrendous flooding that topped the water table right up and is still keeping the brook going.
Overtopped it, You mentioned earlier about changing the bed of the brook in places, giving a better substrate for plants and of course for fish to lay eggs and breed. I mean, the natural order of things, you do get dramatic rises and falls of different species, predator and prey relationships. So as long as you get some surviving, if there's a decent habitat for them to breed in, then the population will naturally rise up again.
And we think floods are a natural part of that, because I think these February floods did flush out quite a lot of the silted up sections.
And that would have
got
helped.
a long enough database. This is what the morph analysis would do for us, because it would enable us to look at a section of riverbed before a flood and afterwards, and see if it had changed from sort of rather stinky silt full of worms to a much cleaner, gravelly based bed, which is better for invertebrates and fish. That will come as we gather more citizen science data. And we're always open to new recruits for the monitoring of the invertebrates and for the morph surveys.
Right. Once again, thank you, Nick.
So
Nigel's muted. Sorry, Nick, you were saying?
Sorry, I was just. Sorry, I beg your pardon. I was just saying we're coming to the end of the formal part of the evening, but we do go over by 15 minutes for those people who want a more informal chat, if any do. It varies. Sometimes it just ends up with me, Alan, and Nat chatting away about something else. But you're welcome to stay on and ask any other questions on the discussions that we have, the subject of tonight's meetings, or anything else. Come to that, make some suggestions for other discussions. Just before we go on, I did see that both Helen and Andrew, Helen Stace and Andrew Nixon, were mentioning the type of fish that, some of the type of fish that come up, bullhead, rudd, and apparently sizable chub come up. So
I remember Richard and Emil mentioning them. And I've seen the bullheads myself.
I can imagine. So just to close the formal part of it, what we tend to do is do a closing chat, and Alan does that. So I'm going to hand over to Alan.
Thank you. Well, I've got it here. Yeah. Nick, should I go on to my closing address, or would you like to give a rounding off summary?
Yeah, I'll just quickly round up. I mean, a lot of this information is available in other places. As I say, first stop would be the Trust website, and have a look at the projects page, which has got lots of information about other interesting projects, including the Ice Age ponds, which I think several members of the audience would be interested in. It's possible to email questions to the Trust if there are any. There's also the HiBER blog, which does have an email address attached to it, and questions could be put there. Joining the Trust is always looking out for new members. The Wildside magazine that you get quarterly is very good, and it has an article on this project that we're talking about this evening in the current edition. In terms of going forward, as I say, I've said several times, we're always looking out for volunteers, either for the practical work parties, for the historical research, for the invertebrate monitoring, or from the morph surveying. There's many different ways to get involved. And in terms of the bigger picture, looking for going ahead, we've got further investigation of the Aylesbrook. We've got the planting of the wildflower meadows and the possible sort of marshland planting, the dredging out, particularly the bottom bit of the Merton Meadow car park. There is plenty of work needing to be done. It will need funding because even the clearance of the coppicing work, we need to hire a chipper for that work, which is about 150 quid a day. Without that, we would be struggling to do the work because we wouldn't have any way of disposing of the debris that is produced to let the light in. So, yeah, there's lots to do. It's a great project. It has generated a huge amount of interest, not just tonight, but generally, as do many of the Trust's projects. The Lug Valley project, Country File have frequently interviewed Sophie Cowling and the team working on that. So yeah, join the Trust if you're not already a member.
Right, Nick, thank you. So in closing, a formal close from myself, and then we carry on chatting informally for a while. Thank you so much for attending this evening, all of you. Been great to have so many people here. Jeremy, thank you for joining us and introducing Nick. Good that we've been able to provide this platform for what was to have been your Civic Society presentation back in the spring, before coronavirus curtailed such public meetings. Nick, thank you so much for joining us and giving such a fascinating presentation about the brook that we've all been aware of, but cannot have appreciated to anything like this depth. It clearly has enormous potential. Also, a special thank you to you, Nigel, for providing, as always, the unlimited Zoom facility and managing the technical side of things. The Herefordshire Wildlife Trust is part of the National Wildlife Trust, which continually works to strengthen government plans for wildlife legislation. In Herefordshire, it's now based at Queenswood. It manages over 50 nature reserve sites across the county. Volunteer work parties go out each week to visit, develop and manage these as required. Hereford Wildlife Trust, as Nick has been saying, would welcome new members. And I've got the magazine here, which comes out quarterly, spring 2019, so it's going back a year. 4,982 members, and they would welcome many more. It's a great thing to support. And the magazine, can I show it properly? I'm going to show it in front of the camera. It's a lovely publication, a superb quality publication once a quarter. Well, they got to. Contact email address I put on the chat quite early on. It's about 2 inches down or so. I'll put it up again in a couple of minutes when I've finished. So that's the website. Be your most direct way just to see what Hereford Wildlife Trust is up to, and then you can take it further as your interest takes you. And also at the top of the chat, it's not because I've forgotten, I put it lower down. I put my email address, alan@walden1. If you would like to be added to our discussion evening email list and receive regular updates about forthcoming discussion evenings. Well, we hope you've enjoyed it and indeed found interest of value. It has been. Things coming up. Thursdays, we have storytelling for adults. Listen, perhaps tell a story yourself. Fridays, 6:30 to 7, storytelling for children. Tuesdays, 7:30, mindfulness with Franca continues. And the links are in my Sunday email and Nat's MailChimps. Next Wednesday, discussion evening, 8th of July, 7:30 p.m. We shall have another guest speaker, Richard Priestley, giving a presentation, and the title is Big Questions and Unthinkable Answers. And he's looking to address take us through the big picture and to begin a series of discussion evenings about the network of interlinking crises, climate, ecology, and inequality. That's going to make another great discussion evening next Wednesday. Finally, thank you for attending. Take care and much hope to see you next week.